Vidalban high-res had never failed him. Now it strobed amber across the cracked ferroglass, cycling a classification it could not finish. Mad, then cat, then mad again, while the thing it was trying to name stood 600 meters out and did not bother to move. Then it gave up and went black. The countdown on Ansel Kellard's secondary display read, 3 minutes and 40 seconds to surrender. He did not know who was counting. He did not know the year. He knew the machine on the ridge was wrong. It stood on digitigrade legs that bent backward at the knee, like something that had learned to walk by watching a bird. Its torso carried 2 enormous missile housings mounted high and outboard. Its arms ended in weapon barrels, rather than hands. It stood about as tall as his own Marauder, which meant it weighed about what his own Marauder weighed, which was impossible, because nothing that heavy moved the way that thing had moved when it crested the ridge. 75 tons should walk at 43.2 kilometers per hour. That was not opinion. That was the arithmetic of mass and Myanmar and a fusion plant. And it had been true since before Kellard's grandfather was born. The thing on the ridge had come over the crest at exactly twice that. Hound actual. This is Hound 2. Corinne Duvernay's voice came through the neuro-helmet speakers with the flat hiss of a channel that had been open too long. I have a firing solution on nothing. My rangefinder says 600 meters. My threat board says I am being illuminated by 4 separate emitters I cannot identify. What do you want me to do? Nothing, Kellard said. Stand still, Captain. Stand still, Corinne. Behind him, spread along the shallow bowl of dead grass, where the Ashen Hounds had walked down off the dropship's ramp 2 hours earlier, 11 other machines stood exactly as still as he had ordered them to. 12 mechs, 38 men and women in the hulls and in the ground crews. Everything he had. To understand how they came to be standing in that bowl, you have to go back 9 weeks and 1 blown jump. The contract had been ordinary. That was the part Kellard would come back to later. The way a tongue goes back to a broken tooth. 3 months of garrison duty on a Federated Suns world called Ridgebrook, on the rimward edge of the Capellan March, guarding an ore consortium and a hydro plant, and the private dignity of a minor noble named Baron Renard Aldane. Standard terms. 30% up front. The balance on completion, salvage waived, and a hard arrival clause with a penalty that would have eaten the whole margin. They had come off a periphery contract with holes in their armor and a payroll 2 weeks behind, and the only route that met the arrival clause ran through Lyran space. The cordon was waiting at the last transit system. 4 Lyran Commonwealth vessels parked square on the zenith point, and 2 more on the nadir, all of them flying anti-piracy pennants, all of them running what the Lyran officer on the comm channel called a routine transit assessment. It was not a war measure. The Commonwealth and the Federated Suns were allies, and nobody was blockading anybody. It was simply a system commander who had noticed how much traffic had to cross his gravity well, and who had a cousin in the customs service. The assessment came to 11,000 sea bills. The queue to pay it was 9 weeks long. Kellard remembered standing on the observation deck of the Second Thought with the numbers in his hand, doing the arithmetic 3 separate times and hoping it would come out differently. 11,000 he did not have. 9 weeks he did not have. A penalty clause that would break him. Nadia Aleso, who owned the Second Thought and had hauled the Hounds for 6 years, had listened to all of it without expression, and then said the thing that killed them. There's a pirate point. It sat above the system's outer gas giant, a marginal gravitational hollow that opened and closed with the alignment of 3 moons. Comrade Lund, her navigator, had a solution window of 22 minutes and ephemeris data 4 years old. He said he could not guarantee the field geometry. He said, with the careful neutrality of a man who wants the record to show he said it, that a Kearny-Fuchida drive controller was not built to shape a field from a point that dirty. Kellard had given the order anyway. He would have given a great deal afterward to have that back. The jump had a texture. Jumps did not have textures. Jumps were nothing at all. A stomach drop, a taste like a coin on the tongue, and then a different sky. This one went on. It went on the way a fall goes on, when the fall is longer than a fall should be, and somewhere in the middle of it there was a low, grinding pressure behind the eyes. And then the second thought was somewhere else, and every alarm on her board was screaming. The controller had let go. Not cracked, not degraded. Let go. Lund pulled a component out of a bulkhead rack that had been a precision instrument and was now a fused gray brick, and held it up and did not say anything. They had come out at a nadir point. That much was right. And when Lund finished his star fix, the coordinates were right too. They were exactly where they had meant to go, orbiting the correct star. 3 days of dropship burn from a planet named Ridgebrook. Then he ran the fix again, and again. And then he sat very still for a long time. "Captain," he said finally, "the stars have moved. Stars don't move. They do, slowly. It's called proper motion, and you can measure it if your baseline is long enough, and I have a baseline." His voice had gone somewhere thin and high. I checked it against 62 reference stars. I got the same answer, 62 times. "Conrad, it's 3065. Nobody said anything. Somewhere below them, a pump cycled. "We left in 3025. Kellard said, "Yes. /40 years. 40 years and some months. The fix is good to about a year either way. I'd like it not to be good. It's good." They argued about it for a full day, and Kellard argued hardest, because the alternative was to accept it. Then the second thought drifted far enough down the nadir approach to start hearing the system's traffic, and the arguing stopped. The comm boards on the 3025 JumpShip are simple things. They listen on a set of standard frequencies, with a set of standard protocols, and they are not clever, and there is nothing they can be told that they were not built to hear. What the boards heard that day was a wall. Encrypted carrier tones, stacked 6 deep on channels that had been empty commercial bands. Identification, friend or foe interrogations in packet formats the Hounds' equipment could only render as a sound like frying fat. Beacons that talked too fast. And underneath all of it, the open chatter of ordinary people going about ordinary business, which was the part that finished them. Somebody on a freight hauler complained about the price of Clan's spec Myanmar. Somebody else on the same channel said that the word of Blake had made another statement about Terra, and asked whether anyone was still listening to that. A traffic controller cleared an inbound and used a phrase Kellard had never heard in his life, OmniMech. Beatriz Cazares, who was the Hound's master technician, and who had been standing in the hatchway with a mug in her hand, set the mug down very carefully on a stanchion, and then took her hand off it, and then had to put her hand back on the stanchion because she could not stand up. "My son," she said. Kellard had not known what to say. He still did not. Later, and he had 40 years of not knowing coming to him, all at once. Her son had been 4 when the Hounds shipped out. He had been left with her sister on Marlette because a mercenary company is no place for a child, and she had been going to come back in 7 months. "He's 44, she said. "Ansel, he's 44 years old and I am 31. They had 6 days of dropship burn from the nadir point to Ridgebrook orbit, and Kellard spent them learning how much of himself had stopped existing. The Hound's bank was on Marlette. Unclaimed mercenary accounts reverted after 7 years, and the Hounds had been gone for 40. Their bond was posted with the Mercenary Review Board, and there was no Mercenary Review Board. Comstar had split in half in 3052, and the trade had gone to something on Outreach called the Mercenary Review and Bonding Commission, which had never heard of them. His brother had been 17 when Kellard shipped out. Casper, a skinny, furious kid who had wanted to be a mech warrior and settled for the infantry. A records clerk found him, later, and was very kind about it. Enlisted in the armed forces of the Federated Suns in 3029, died on Quentin in the summer of 3039, in a war Kellard had never heard of. 14 years after standing on a landing field and telling his older brother not to do anything stupid. There was no one else. Kellard had always thought of that as an operational advantage. He had the Hounds and nothing else, so there was nothing anyone could use against him. It turned out that when the Hounds no longer legally existed, neither did he. He put the cold comfort down at the old baronial field at Sedge Landing because it was the field on his charts. The charts were 40 years old. The field was still there because fields outlast baronies. And the strip had been extended and resurfaced, and there were 4 hardened revetments at the north end that had not existed in 3025. Ridgebrook traffic had been screaming challenge codes at him the entire descent. He could not read a single one. So, he had done the only thing a garrison company does when it arrives. Walked his mechs down the ramp, formed them up in the bowl east of the strip, and waited to be met by his employer. He was met by 4 machines coming over the ridge, and one of them was impossible. Unidentified formation. This is Lieutenant Colonel Otterline Kirkwood, Armed Forces of the Federated Suns, commanding the Ridgebrook Provisional Garrison. Her voice arrived on an open standard, slowly, the way you speak to someone who might be concussed. You have made planetfall in a Federated Sun system without registry, without clearance, and without transponder. I have you designated hostile. You will power down your reactors and dismount. You have 10 minutes. I will not extend them. That had been 6 minutes ago. Kellard had spent 4 of them trying to explain, and 2 of them listening to Kirkwood not believe him. And the last 20 seconds watching a targeting computer that had been built in the reign of the Star League fail to comprehend the thing on the ridge. He keyed the channel. "Colonel, this is Captain Ansel Kellard, Ashen Hounds. I want to ask you a question, and I want you to answer it honestly because I have nothing left to lose by asking it. Static. Then, ask. What is that machine on your left flank?" A long pause. When Kirkwood came back, something had changed in her voice, and Kellard could not tell yet whether it was pity or the beginning of belief. "That's a timber wolf," she said. "Inner sphere reporting name Mad Cat. Clan Wolf design, 75 tons, bulldog salvage out of the Jaguar occupation zone, 3059. Captain, do you understand what I just said to you?" "No," Kellard said. "I understood 4 of those words." Another pause. Longer. "Power down," Kirkwood said. And now, it was definitely pity. "Please. I've got a lieutenant over there who's been begging me for permission to shoot for 6 minutes, and I would very much like to not let him." Kellard looked at the countdown. 2 minutes, 11 seconds. He thought about the arithmetic. 12 mechs, all of them older than anyone on that ridge. 16 single heat sinks in his own hull, which had been generous in 3025 and was, he was beginning to suspect, a joke now. 2 Magna Hellstars whose absolute outer reach was 540 meters. The Timberwolf was standing at 660 meters. The whole gap between one century and the next was 60 meters of empty grass, and the machine on the ridge had chosen to stand on the far side of it, and it had not chosen by accident. Hounds. This is actual. He was surprised how level it came out. Weapons safe, reactors to stand by, hatches open, hands where they can see them. Do it now. Captain, Piers Thibault, in the Hunchback, and his voice cracked on it. Thibault had a Tomazuru 180mm autocannon 20 in his right shoulder and had never in his life declined a fight. Piers, if they wanted us dead, we would have been dead before I finished my first sentence. Power down. One by one, the Ashen Hounds knelt. They took the mechs. That was the first thing, and it was worse than being shot at. An impound detail came down from the ridge with infantry and powered armor. Kellard had no vocabulary for. Armored shapes the size of a large man and a half, that moved too well, that climbed his marauder's leg like a ladder. They pulled the ammunition and the reactor keys. They walked all 12 machines into a hangar at the north end of the field and set a guard on the doors. And Beatrice Cazares stood outside it in the wind for 2 hours because she would not go where she could not see them. They were processed. That was the word on the form. 38 displaced persons of unverifiable origin. No valid identification, no lawful status, held pending disposition. There was no cruelty in any of it, which was somehow the hardest part to bear, because cruelty could have been fought. Kellard sat across a folding table from her, in an office that had been a grain-scale house, and she went through it with him, line by line. The Aldane barony had been dissolved in 3046. Renard Aldane died in 3031. His daughter Perpetua held the seat for 15 years and died without issue, and the estate went to the Crown. And the Crown sold the Ore Consortium to a combine on New Syrtis, and there was no one alive on Ridgebrook who had ever met an Aldane. The Hounds' contract was a legal nullity. Not void, nullity. There was no party to enforce it against. Their sea-bills were not merely devalued. The specific notes in the Code Comfort Strongbox had been withdrawn from circulation in 3038, and were, Kirkwood said, probably worth something to a collector. And their mechs. I want to be straight with you about this part, Kirkwood said, because I think you've earned straight. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with gray coming in hard at the temples, and the particular exhaustion of an officer who has been given a job and not the means to do it. Your machines are worth a great deal of money, not as weapons, as artifacts. There are collectors in the Lyran Alliance who would bid against each other for an unmodified MAD-3R that came out of a factory before the Fourth Succession War. Somebody is going to come for them. They're not artifacts. They're my company. I know that. She turned her cup around on the table. I'm telling you what the paperwork thinks, because in about 9 days, the paperwork is going to arrive. Kellard asked her the question he had been carrying for 6 days. Colonel, what happened? And Kirkwood, to her enormous credit, told him. As much of it as fit in 4 hours, the Fourth Succession War in 3028. 3 years after he left, which swallowed half the Capellan Confederation, the Federated Commonwealth, made out of 2 realms by a marriage and broken apart again by a family. a memory core recovered on Helm that gave the inner spear back its own lost engineering. And then, in 3049, an enemy out of the dark beyond the periphery, gone 2.5 centuries, and come back with machines nobody could stop. The clans, Tukayed, the Truce, a thing called Operation Bulldog, and a thing called the Great Refusal, and a Smoke Jaguar occupation zone that was not there anymore. And now, she said, a civil war. Catherine Steiner Davion in one chair, and her brother Victor with an army behind him. And every garrison in the Federated Sun split down the middle and fighting the unit billeted across the same landing field. That's why I'm here with a reinforced lance and 2 armor troops, she said. The Ridgebrook Capellan March militia is not on Ridgebrook. They were ordered off-world and broken somewhere they should never have been sent. And they are not coming back. And I have a planetary defense zone, no fleet, a continent of frontier, and 4 working mechs. 4/4. She looked at him levelly. And a Timberwolf my lieutenant loves more than his mother. On the 4th day, Kirkwood's records clerk found Beatrice Cazares' son. Alive, 44 years old, a hydroponics engineer on Marlette, 2 children of his own. There was a public directory listing, and a work address, and a picture 6 years out of date, and the clerk printed it and brought it to the barracks hut, with the awkwardness of a young man carrying something too heavy for him. Cazares looked at the picture of her son for a very long time. Then she folded it once, carefully, and put it in her breast pocket, and went back to arguing with the guard on the hangar door about whether she could inspect her own gyros. That was the moment Kellard understood the thing he had been circling since the stars moved. Everything they had come from was gone. Their employer, their money, their homes, their standing, the entire enormous weight of the world that had made them. All of it turned to paper and dust. And Beatrice Cazares, who had lost more than any of them, had put the picture in her pocket and gone back to the hangar because the company was still there. The company was the only thing that had come through the jump intact. He went to find Kirkwood. She did not have time for him. She had just stopped having time for anything. Because at 1100 hours, on the 5th day, a Capellan Confederation raiding force came into the Ridgebrook system through a pirate point above the second moon and burned for the surface without slowing. Kellard heard it before he was told. You always do in a garrison if you have ears. The pitch of the field changed. Vehicles moved that had not moved in 5 days. He walked to the operations hut and stood in the doorway until somebody noticed him. "Colonel, not now, Captain. How many?" Kirkwood did not look up from the plot table. "2 dropships, Overlord and Union hulls. Call it a reinforced battalion with armor. And they're not raiding the field. They're going for the Quillen Cut." She dragged a finger across the display. "The Ore Consortium. Every ounce of processed germanium on this planet moves through the loading gantries at Vantar Crossing. And germanium is what you make Kearny-Fuchida cores out of. And the Confederation has been shopping. What have you got? You know what I've got. 4 mechs and a Timberwolf. 4 mechs, a Timberwolf, 2 armor troops, and a militia battalion of people who work the ore train 6 days a week." She finally looked up. "Say what you came to say, Captain. I have 9 minutes before I have to go be an officer." Kellard said it. "Give me back my mechs. You are not registered with the Commission. You are not citizens of the Federated Suns. You have no contract, no bond, and no legal existence. If I hand 12 BattleMechs to 38 foreign nationals with no status, I will be court-martialed, and I will deserve it. I know. Your machines are 40 years obsolete. You would be taking a company of museum pieces into a battalion action against Confederation regulars with Gauss Rifles and Guardian suites. I know that too. Then give me a reason. Kellard put both hands on the edge of the plot table because his legs were not entirely reliable. Because my contract says Ridgebrook, he said. It says I garrison this world, and I stand between it and a hostile landing for 3 months. The party's dead. The money's dust. The paper is a nullity, and I have read it 400 times in 5 days, and there is one thing on it that is not a nullity, Colonel, and that is the word Ridgebrook. It's still here. It's the only thing in my entire life that is still here. Kirkwood looked at him. You'll die out there. Probably. But we'll die as a company, and that is a considerably better offer than the one your paperwork is bringing me in. 4 days. She was quiet for 4 full seconds. Then she said, "Get in the hangar," and turned back to the plot table and started talking about ammunition. The Quillon cut was a gorge, and that was the only piece of luck the Ashen Hounds got. The Quillon River had cut a channel 300 meters deep, and rarely more than 500 wide through the plateau, and the Ore Consortium had built Vanta Crossing right down inside it, processing sheds, settling ponds, a railhead, a forest of loading gantries standing over the water on concrete legs. The walls were sheer. The floor was a maze of steel and stone and steam. There were 2 ways in. The rail cut at the eastern end and the switchback road down the western wall. Kellard stood in front of 11 mech warriors and 1 very tired AFF's lieutenant colonel in a rail shed at midnight and explained why that mattered. Everything they have is better than everything we have, he said. That's arithmetic, not morale. So I'll say it once, and then we stop. Their lasers reach further. Their armor is lighter and stronger. Their heat sinks work twice as hard as ours. In open ground at range, they will take us apart without ever letting us close. He put his hand flat on the map. So we do not fight in open ground, and we do not fight at range. We fight in the cut. Down there, 600 meters does not exist. Nothing has a line longer than 200 meters, and most of it is under 100. Every advantage they have evaporates, and every single thing we are good at comes back. Corinne Duvernay, arm in a sling from a fall on the hangar deck and refusing to discuss it, said, "And what are we good at, Captain?" "Being cheap," Kellard said. "In 3025, nobody could replace armor. Not really. You patched it. You re-rolled it. You begged. So we learned to shoot at the same plate twice, and we learned that a machine that can't be repaired is a machine you don't risk. Colonel Kirkwood's people were trained in a sphere that has factories again. They have never had to fight poor." He straightened. "We have never fought any other way." He assigned it out. Thibault's hunchback and the 2 Wolverines under the eastern gantries, where the rail cut opened and the ceiling of steel was low. Duvernay's Shadowhawk with the LRM-5 rack up on a processing shed roof, not to kill anything, but to make noise from a direction that did not matter. Ivo Belil's Vindicator VND-1R, and the Centurion in the Settling Pond Causeway. A Days and Chemdy's Locust, 20 tons, 1 medium laser, 2 machine guns, and 129.6 kilometers per hour of pure nerve. Loose in the maze, with orders to touch nothing and report everything. And Kellard's Marauder, in the deep shadow under the number 3 loading gantry, at the exact spot where the western switchback road reached the gorge floor, 110 meters from the last bend. Kirkwood put her 4 AFFS machines and both armor troops at the head of the switchback on the plateau in the open. Bait. She did not pretend it was anything else. The Capellans came at dawn. They came the way a competent force comes, with the electronic warfare package running first. Kellard's threat board lit up for 4 seconds, went to hash, and stayed there. Somewhere on the plateau, a Confederation machine with a Guardian suite was flooding the valley, and every targeting link, missile guidance channel, and active probe the Ridgebrook garrison owned went deaf at once. On the AAFF's command net, Kellard heard the exact moment Kirkwood's fire control degraded. He heard a young man's voice say the words, "I've lost the mesh," with a rising note in it. And in the Marauder's fire control, nothing happened, because there was nothing to happen to. The Tauban Hi-Res was a mechanical tracking system with an optical sight and a ranging laser, and it had no data link because data links had not been invented when it was built. The Hound's comms were open unencrypted voice on a fixed frequency, which meant the Capellans could hear every word, which Kellard had already accounted for. The Guardian suite on the plateau was jamming protocols the Ashen Hounds had never possessed. They had spent 6 days being the poorest, oldest, most useless soldiers on the planet. For the next 90 minutes, they were the only ones who could see. Hound 6, contact, Nikemdi's voice, absolutely steady, from somewhere in the gantry maze. Rail cut, eastern end, 4 heavies leading, 2 mediums trailing, infantry riding the hulls. They're coming in slow, and they're looking up. Looking up for what? For us, on the rim. Captain, they think we're on the rim. Kellard felt something turn over in his chest. Of course they did. A modern commander fights the cut from above, because from above his weapons reach the floor, and nothing on the floor reaches him. Putting a battle line inside a gorge, under a roof of steel, at 90 meters, with no elevation and no reach. No officer trained in the last 20 years would do it. It was not a clever plan. It was so stupid the Capellan Sang Shao had not spent 1 second of his life considering it. "All hounds," Kellard said. "Hold. Let them come past you. Nobody fires until the hunchback fires." Piers Thibault held for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, which Kellard would say afterward was the most disciplined thing he had ever seen a mech warrior do. Then the lead Capellan heavy walked under the eastern gantries at 90 meters, and Thibault put a Tomozuru autocannon 20 round into its right hip actuator from an angle it had no armor for. The cut came apart. 2 Wolverines walked out of a maintenance bay and put autocannon 5 fire and short-range missiles into the same machine's exposed side at 60 meters. The lead heavy went down onto its knee in the shallows, and the second one behind it tried to twist and could not, because a 70-ton mech in a rail cut has nowhere to twist to, and Shearshay Prosser walked her Wolverine straight into it and hit it in the cockpit face with a Harpoon 6S RM6 salvo at 40 meters. On the plateau, Kirkwood's line opened up on the column head at the top of the switchback, and the Capellan armor, deprived of its guidance channels and being shot at from 3 directions by machines whose signatures its threat library had trouble parsing, did what armor does. It committed. 16 vehicles and a company of mechs came down the switchback road into the gorge to kill whatever was in there, because the thing in there was killing them, and the thing on the rim was only annoying them. Kellard sat in the dark under the number 3 gantry, with his reactor at standby and his heat curve flat and his hands off the sticks, and watched a Confederation heavy lance come down a road that had 110 meters of straight at the bottom of it. He waited until the 4th machine was on the straight. Then he brought the VLAR 300 up and stepped out. The first Magna Hellstar took the lead Capellan through the left torso at 80 meters, at a range where a particle cannon does not so much penetrate armor as remove the concept of it. The second Hellstar hit the same plate 2 seconds later, because that was the entire doctrine of a poor company. Hit it twice in the same place and stop wasting your life. The whirlwind autocannon. 5 walked 3 rounds across the wound. The mech behind it fired a Gauss slug that went through Kellard's left arm and took the medium laser with it, and his heat scale climbed into the amber and stayed there and stayed there. Because 16 single heat sinks in a hull that has just fired 2 particle cannons is not a cooling system. It is an opinion. He held the trigger anyway. He was not going to get a second engagement. The fight in the Quillen Cut lasted 1 hour and 34 minutes. It was, by any measure that a staff college would recognize, a defeat in progress the entire time. The Ashen Hounds were outmassed, outranged, outgunned, and outnumbered nearly 3 to 1, and they lost machines steadily from the first minute. They also would not break, and they were standing in the only place on Ridgebrook where that mattered. Ivo Belier's Vindicator went down on the settling pond causeway with both legs gone and kept firing its PPC across the water for 11 more minutes until a Capellan medium got behind it. Belial did not eject. Kellard stopped letting people speculate about why. Corinne Duvernay emptied her LRM-5 rack from the shed roof into nothing in particular, exactly as ordered, and drew 2 Capellan machines up onto the roofs where the Locust was waiting. Adesine Kemdi spent 40 minutes running 129.6 kilometers per hour through a gantry forest, killing nothing at all, and was by Kirkwood's later reckoning worth an entire lance. And Lieutenant Cassian Corvin brought the Timberwolf down the switchback into the cut, because he was 26 years old and had the best machine on the planet and could not stand to watch. Kellard saw it happen. He was 200 meters off, backing his marauder into the shelter of a concrete gantry leg, with his left arm gone at the shoulder and his heat scale in the red. And he saw the Timberwolf come around the bend at 86.4 kilometers per hour, with both extended-range large lasers already firing, and it was, he would admit this later, without reservation, the most beautiful and terrible thing he had ever seen a machine do. It killed a Capellan medium in one pass, and did not slow down. Its lasers reached clear across the gorge. For about 11 seconds, Cassian Corvin owned the Quillen Cut. Then a Confederation heavy that had been sitting in a processing shed put a Gauss slug through the Timberwolf's already breached left torso at 90 meters. 1 slug, 1 location. The Timberwolf stopped as though it had walked into a wall. Every light on it died at once. Kellard, who had been fighting BattleMechs for 19 years and had never seen a 75-ton machine simply switch off, understood in the same second that he was watching something he had been told about and had not believed. A Clan Extramite engine puts part of itself in each side torso. Losing one doesn't kill it like an inner sphere design, but it takes 2 critical hits to the shielding. The massive heat spike from 2 breached engine housings, combined with the firing heat of twin extended-range lasers, spiked the heat scale past the red line, forcing a shutdown the pilot could not override. The Timberwolf stood there, locked down and dead on its feet in the middle of the gorge floor, with a boy roasting inside it, and the Capellan heavy walked out of the shed to finish the job. Kellard put his marauder between them. He would think about it a great deal afterward, and never be able to make it sound like a decision. He stepped out from behind the gantry leg with 1 arm. A dead autocannon, a heat scale 9 minutes into the red, and 1 working particle cannon at 130 meters against a fresh Confederation, heavy, with a Gauss rifle. The Capellan fired first and hit him square in the left torso. The Marauder's valiant lamellar armor, 40 years old and patched in 11 places with plate that did not match, split like a dropped plate. The slug went into the torso and destroyed the heat sink, shattered the structural integrity, and did approximately 11 other things Beatrice Cazares would enumerate for him later at length. And the VLA 300 kept running, because it was a standard fusion engine, and it lived in the center torso where engines had lived since the 25th century. And a hole in the left side of a Marauder is a wound. For a Timberwolf running that hot, it is a forced shutdown. Kellard did not think any of that at the time. What he thought was, it did not kill me. What he did was walk forward and put his one remaining Magna Hellstar into the Capellan's center torso at 90 meters, and then walk 4 steps closer and do it again. And then, when the particle cannon shut down from heat and the cockpit was over 60 degrees and his sweat had stopped evaporating, he did the thing that the Marauder had been built to do, and that nobody in 3065 ever expected to see. He raised the heavy weapon housing on his remaining arm and beat the Capellan mech to death with it. 4 strikes. The ball and socket joint that gave a Marauder its famous traverse also let it swing like nothing else its weight, and the Magna Hellstar housing was engineered by Star League technicians to survive being used as a club. On the 4th strike, the Confederation machine's cockpit failed, and it went over backward into the settling pond and did not get up. Kellard's heat scale hit shutdown threshold 9 seconds later. The Marauder went dark and dropped to one knee in the shallows, and he sat in a black cockpit in 68 degrees of heat and listened to the fight go on without him until the reactor came back. By then, it was ending. The Capellan Sang Shao had lost 11 mechs and 9 vehicles inside a gorge he had never meant to enter, to an enemy he could not identify, in a fight where his electronic advantage was worth precisely nothing. He had come to take a germanium loading facility, not to conduct a siege, and raiders who cannot leave are not raiders. He broke off in the 94th minute and ran for his dropships, and Autoline Kirkwood, who had spent the entire morning on the plateau feeding her 4 machines into the top of the switchback one at a time to keep the road contested. Let him go. The Ashen Hounds lost 3. Ivo Beliali on the causeway. Saoirse Prosser, whose Wolverine took a Gauss round through the cockpit at the eastern gantries in the 71st minute, instantly and without any last words at all, which Kellard was grateful for, and ashamed of being grateful for. And Piers Thibault. The hunchback had done what a hunchback does, which is stand in a doorway and refuse to move, and it had killed 4 machines doing it. In the 88th minute, a Capellan autocannon burst, went through a breach in its left torso and found the ammunition bin, and the Tomodzuro's remaining rounds cooked off. And there was nothing anybody could have done. And everybody who had ever piloted an HBK-4G had always known there would not be. They found the machine 2 hours later, fused into a shape that had stopped being a shape, under the number 7 gantry, where the shadows were deepest. 9 mechs walked out of the Quillen Cut. Kellard's came out with 1 arm, no autocannon, a cracked rib, and a hole you could put a chair through. The stone was outside the chapel at Sedge Landing, and Kirkwood had to show him where it was, because he would never have looked. It was granite, waist-high, weathered down to soft edges. It had been put up in 3026 by Baron Renard Aldane, and the inscription had been recut once, some decades back, by somebody who thought it was worth keeping legible. It read, "The Ashen Hounds, lost with all hands, 3025. They did not arrive." Below that were 38 names, because 38 was what the Hounds had listed on the manifest they filed at contract signing, and every single one of them was on that rock, in alphabetical order, cut by a stonemason who had been dead longer than Kellard had been alive. Kellard found his own name in the second column. He stood in front of it for a long time in the cold, with his hands in his pockets, and Beatrice Cazares stood beside him, and neither of them said anything at all. Then Cazares said, "We're going to need 3 more lines." They're already on there. They're on there as lost. She had the folded picture of her son in her breast pocket and had not taken it out once. That's not what happened to them, Ansel. Something else happened to them. It ought to say so. They added the 3 names at the base of the stone on a new plinth with the correct date. Ivo Belil, Shirshe Prosser, Piers Thibault. Killed in action, Quillon Cut, Ridgebrook, 3065. 40 years late, on the one world the rest of the rocks said they had never reached. Kirkwood came out to the field on the 9th day with a data slate and the expression of a woman who has spent a week writing something extremely creative. "The paperwork arrived," she said. "As predicted, there is a salvage claim on 12 BattleMechs of unattributed origin, and there is a disposition order for 38 displaced persons. And there is a note from a functionary on New Syrtis suggesting that the whole matter be resolved quietly. And I filed a combat action report." She handed him the slate. "Read the 3rd paragraph." Kellard read it twice. The 3rd paragraph stated that a mercenary company operating under a Federated Sons garrison contract issued by the Barony of Ridgebrook had engaged and repulsed a Capellan Confederation battalion strength raid on the Vanta crossing Ore facility at a cost of 3 killed in action, and that the terms of the said contract were assessed as fulfilled. "That contract's a nullity," Kellard said. "You told me that yourself. I told you there was no party to enforce it against. I never said there was no party to honor it." Kirkwood took the slate back. The barony's obligations reverted to the Crown in 3046, along with the assets. The Crown, on this planet, at this hour, is a lieutenant colonel with a rubber stamp and nobody left to ask. It'll be reviewed. It might be reversed. But it will be reviewed for years, and while it's under review, it is not a nullity. And while it is not a nullity, you are not displaced persons. You are a contracted unit in good standing with an unpaid balance. How much of a balance? /70% of a 3025 garrison contract, she almost smiled, adjusted for 4 decades of accrued interest at the statutory rate. "Captain, I have run the number 4 times. It is a genuinely offensive amount of money." Kellard stood there in the wind on a landing field, 40 years past the end of the world, and found that he had absolutely nothing to say. "You'll want to register with the Commission on Outreach," Kirkwood said. "You'll need a bond, and you have one now. You'll need to re-equip, and I would strongly suggest you do it before somebody makes you a collector's offer you can't refuse." She looked past him at the hangar, where Beatrice Cazares was standing on a work platform arguing with an AFFS ordnance sergeant about torque values. "And you'll want to decide what you're going to call yourselves, because there is a rock behind that chapel that says the Ashen Hounds are dead, and I am not in the business of arguing with rocks." Kellard thought about it for a while. They took the balance. They paid for a passage that put Beatrice Cazares on Marlette 11 weeks later, standing in a hydroponics bay in front of a man with her own jaw, and gray in his hair. And what was said there belongs to the 2 of them and to nobody else. She came back in the spring. She had said she would. She had been saying it for 40 years. They bought the Second Thought's hull out of Nadia Alekshow's debt and sold it to a Ridgebrook salvage consortium because a Kearny-Fuchida drive controller in 3065 cost more than the ship it went in. Aleshow took the money and a berth at Sedge Landing and never went up again. Conrad Lund spent the rest of his life trying to make the numbers work, and never did. They kept the name. Kellard had gone back to the stone on the last night before the registry filing went out, and read the 38 names in the cold, and understood that changing it would have been a way of agreeing with it. So The Ashen Hounds registered with the Mercenary Review and Bonding Commission in the spring of 3066-9 BattleMechs, 35 personnel, 1 Union-class dropship, garrison and defensive contracts only, home port Ridgebrook. The MAD-3R came back out of the shop with a mismatched left arm and no autocannon at all, because the Whirlwind mount had always been the weakest thing on the design, and Cazares had wanted it gone since 3019. Kellard let her have it. He was learning to let people have things. Cassian Corvin came to see him before the garrison rotated out. He had been pulled out of the dead Timberwolf with a broken collarbone and a permanent adjustment to his opinions, and he stood in the hangar door a while, working out how to start. That mech, he said finally, was worth more than this entire planet. It was a magnificent machine, Lieutenant. /1 slug. Corvin was still angry about it, and Kellard suspected he would be for years. 90 meters. 1 slug in the left torso and it was over. Yours took the same hit in the same place, and you got up and walked. Mine's worse in every way that matters, Kellard said. It's slower. It's hotter. It can't reach half as far, it can't hit half as hard, and it will lose to yours 9 times out of 10. He put his hand flat against the Marauder's scarred left flank, where the new plate still did not match. But it was built by people who assumed it was going to get hurt. That's the whole difference. Everything since has been built by people who assumed it wouldn't. Corvin thought about that. Which is better? Neither. Yours is better if you can replace it. Kellard looked up at the 12-meter shape above him, patched and crooked, and still standing. Mine's better if you can't. The Ashen Hounds held a Federated Sons garrison contract on Ridgebrook for the next 9 years, which was, Kellard liked to point out to anyone unwise enough to ask, 36 times longer than the 3 months they had originally signed for. He never got used to the sky. 40 years had taken his brother, his money, his employer, his standing, and the entire world he had been raised inside, and put in their place a cold plateau planet with a gorge in it and a rock with his name already on it. And there were nights on the strip at Sedge Landing when he could not make the arithmetic of his own life come out. But in the mornings, there were 9 mechs to keep running, and then 11, and eventually 14. There were pilots to train, most of them born after he was declared dead. There was a hangar with the doors open, and Beatriz Cazares shouting at somebody inside it. He had arrived in the end. 40 years and some months late, considerably the worse for wear, with a company that no longer existed on paper, and now did. The stone behind the chapel was wrong, and Ansel Kellard had spent the rest of his life proving it, and that turned out to be enough.